If you dance this tango with me, I'll marry you right here in front of everyone. If you dance this tango with me, I'll marry you right here in front of everyone, shouted the millionaire Javier Montero, standing tall in the center of Madrid's Palacio, a glass of champagne in his hand and a mocking smile painted on his face. His words fell like a whip in the expectant silence of the hall, and immediately the guests erupted in laughter. The echo of that laughter bounced off the crystal chandeliers, the gilded walls, the marble floor that seemed to vibrate under the ladies' heels and the gentlemen's polished shoes. There, among trays of glasses and discreet shadows, she was. Lucia Morales in her black uniform with a white apron, stifling the tremor in her hands as the crowd pointed at her as if she were cheap entertainment. They all expected to see her refuse, flee, break into tears. No one imagined that tonight, in that very ballroom, fate was about to take a turn that would silence even the last of those laughs. The crystal chandeliers shone like small suns suspended over the grand hall of the Hotel Palacio de Madrid. The orchestra's music floated in the air, elegant, measured, as if each note bowed reverently before the guests in impeccable suits and silk dresses, laughing with champagne glasses in hand. Amid all that luxury, he dominated the space. Javier Montero, the capital's most eligible heir, moved with the confidence of someone who had never heard no. His black tuxedo, his impeccable white vest, and that smug half-smile made him the inevitable center of attention. To the side, among trays and discreet movements, was she. Lucia Morales in her black uniform with a white apron, her hair pulled back in a low bun that revealed the delicacy of her face. She wore no jewelry, no artifice, only the silence of someone who had learned to be invisible among the abundance of others. The guests murmured curiously when Javier raised his voice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, gently tapping his glass with a silver spoon. "Tonight, I want to conduct an experiment." Some laughed, others waited, intrigued. Javier walked up to Lucia, who was holding a tray of glasses with both hands. His steps echoed on the marble, and when he stood before her, he extended his hand with calculated theatrically. "Lucia," he pronounced her name as if it were an exotic game. "If you dance this tango with me, I'll marry you right here in front of everyone." The ballroom exploded in laughter. Some guests covered their mouths in feigned scandal, others whispered among themselves with cruelty. The orchestra paused for a moment, as if also waiting for her reaction. Lucia felt the tray tremble in her hands. Heat rose to her cheeks, but she didn't lower her gaze. Her eyes met Javier's, and though the mockery aimed to reduce her to mere entertainment, there was something more in that look, a silent strength none of those present knew how to read. He smiled confidently, sure she would retreat. The others settled in to watch the spectacle as if attending a play where they already knew the ending. But Lucia didn't move. Her fingers tightened on the tray, her lips pressed firmly together. The entire hall was suspended in expectant silence. If this story has already moved you in these first few minutes, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from and leave your like to keep following along. The laughter spread like a cruel echo reverberating in every corner of the hall. The gold of the chandeliers and the glitter of the dresses seemed to amplify the mockery. The ladies in silver sequins covered their mouths pretending scandal, while the men with snifters of cognac leaned forward so as not to miss a detail. Javier spread his arms as if presenting a circus act. "Look at her," he exclaimed with scorn. "Our dear employee turned princess for a night, if she dares." The hall erupted in another wave of laughter. Lucia lowered her gaze. Her hands clenched tightly on the white apron, and in her chest, her heartbeat became dull hammer blows. She didn't want them to see her tremble. She didn't want to give them more reason to laugh, but this crowd wouldn't be satisfied. They awaited her shame like one awaits a toast. "Come on, Lucia," Javier leaned toward her, smiling arrogantly. "Don't be afraid, it's just a tango. Or do you not even know how to dance?" The cruelty of the question fell like a whip. Some guests let out theatrical oaths as if the mockery had touched a delicious limit. A young woman in a jade green dress murmured, "I bet she doesn't even know what a tango is." Lucia took a deep breath. The air burned in her throat, but she didn't raise her voice. She held on to that silence she had so often used as a shield, even as she was crumbling inside. Javier turned toward the audience, enjoying every second. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe we all have our answer. An employee is only good for cleaning glasses, not for dancing with a Montero. The laughter was even more biting. At that moment, Lucia closed her eyes for a second. She remembered the touch of strong arms, the music of a distant bandoneon, and her mother's voice whispering to her as a child, "Dance with your heart, daughter, not with your feet." Her breathing calmed, and when she opened her eyes, they were no longer the same. There was a hidden spark in them, a fire no one expected to find in that woman in a simple uniform. The hall, still laughing, had no idea what was about to happen. Silence took over the hall like an unexpected shadow. The laughter that had overflowed seconds earlier now floated in the air, broken and unsure. Lucia slowly raised her head. It wasn't a sudden or defiant gesture. It was as if an ancient force pushed her to show, for the first time in years, that she wasn't invisible. Her eyes scanned the rows of faces watching her. She saw red-painted lips twisting in cruel smiles. She saw gold cufflinks gleaming on the sleeves of men who believed they owned the night. And finally, she found Javier Montero's eyes. He maintained that arrogant, confident smile, the smile of someone who believes he has the power to decide everyone's fate. "What's wrong, Lucia?" he asked with scorn, loud enough for all to hear. "Do you actually think of accepting?" She didn't answer. She carefully placed the tray she was carrying on a nearby table. The sound of the crystal glasses clinking was sharp, like a gunshot in the silence. Some guests startled, others leaned forward, convinced they were about to witness the final humiliation. Javier took a step toward her. "Come on," he said, bowing with feigned courtesy. "Don't be afraid, it's just a tango, though, of course, you might not even know what that is." A dry chuckle escaped from a man with a thin mustache. "How bold that would be," he remarked, delighted. "An employee thinking she's a dancer." The woman in the jade green dress added, barely containing her laughter, "She'll probably trip over her own feet." Lucia heard it all, but she didn't look away from Javier. She had learned to endure the poison of words, the weight of glances that reduced her to nothing. Yet, that night, something different vibrated inside her. She took a deep breath. The air filled her lungs as if she'd been holding it back for years. She straightened her shoulders and with a firm step, moved a little toward the center of the hall. The guests' murmuring rose like a wave. "Did you see that?" whispered a silver-haired lady. She dared to move. Javier smiled even wider, convinced he was in control. He extended his hand theatrically, like an actor enjoying the attention. "So, do you accept dancing this tango with me?" All eyes fixed on her with almost unbearable intensity. The orchestra waited, motionless. Violins in the air, the musicians' fingers frozen over the strings. Time had stopped in that palace illuminated by chandeliers. Lucia didn't respond with words. She took another step, then another, until she stood before him. Javier's heart beat with the thrill of the spectacle he believed he had created. But when Lucia's hand rested on his, something changed. It was a firm, sure, unexpected touch from someone everyone had assumed was defeated. The entire hall erupted in a murmur of disbelief. No one breathed normally. No one knew what would happen in the next seconds. And yet, everyone felt they were about to witness something they would never forget. The orchestra conductor raised his baton with an unsure gesture, glancing sideways at the guests. No one wanted to be the first to break that silence which had become unbearable. It was Javier who gave the order with a snap of his fingers. "A tango," he commanded triumphantly. "Make it one everyone remembers." The first notes of the bandoneon slid out like a melancholic sigh, filling every corner of the hall. The violin joined with a soft lament, and suddenly the atmosphere changed. The mockery began to tinge with expectation. Javier took Lucia by the waist, confident. His hand descended forcefully, as if to remind her he was in charge. "Relax," he whispered with irony. "You just have to follow me." But Lucia didn't react as he expected. She didn't tremble, she didn't hesitate. Her eyes, fixed on his, shone with a calm that threw him off. The first step echoed on the marble. Javier led with wide, exaggerated movements, seeking the spectators' laughter. The crowd held its breath, expecting her to trip, lose her balance, confirm the joke. It didn't happen. Lucia glided with a naturalness no one could understand. Her simple skirt brushed the floor with exact precision. Her feet seemed to know every accent of the music by heart. There was no hesitation, no fear. Javier raised an incredulous eyebrow. He tried a quick spin to put her in a tight spot, but she followed like a perfect shadow, effortlessly. The murmur among the guests became audible. Are you seeing this? How she moves. Sweat began to bead on Javier's forehead. He couldn't allow this woman, whom he himself had humiliated, to shine brighter than him in his own game. He tightened his grip on her waist, almost angrily, and hissed through his teeth, "Where did you learn to move like that?" Lucia didn't answer. She just lowered her gaze for a moment, and in that silent gesture was something stronger than 1,000 words, memory, pain, and an absent voice that still whispered in her heart. The musician seemed to perceive it too. The bandoneon wept more intensely. The violin cried out with sharp notes. The tango was no longer a joke. It was becoming a duel. The audience, fascinated, leaned forward. No one was laughing now. Fans snapped shut, champagne glasses were forgotten on tables. All the luxury of that palace was reduced to a single scene, that of an anonymous employee defying the millionaire in front of everyone with the purity of her dance. And what had been a reason for laughter just minutes ago began to transform into a secret tremor of respect. The tango advanced like an electric current taking hold of everyone present. Each note of the bandoneon pierced the skin. Each beat of the double bass made the gilded walls vibrate. The guests who had laughed at first were now silent, hypnotized by a scene no one could have imagined. Lucia spun with a precision that seemed impossible for someone in an employee's uniform. Her feet grazed the marble flawlessly, marking the rhythm with a confidence that asked no permission. Every movement held the force of someone who has loved in silence, who has guarded a secret fire for years. Javier tried to regain control. He pulled her abruptly, guiding her into a faster spin, hoping she'd stumble. But Lucia responded with surprising fluidity. Her skirt twirled like a dark wing, her arms found perfect balance. The audience murmured in astonishment. "Did you see that?" whispered a lady with a red fan. "She's not just dancing, she's commanding." A man with a graying mustache shook his head, incredulous. "This isn't coincidence. That woman has trained. You can tell." Javier smiled stiffly, though inside he was beginning to burn with humiliation. His game was slipping from his hands. What was supposed to be a cruel joke was turning into a spectacle that exposed him. "Don't get cocky," he said through gritted teeth while making her step back with more violent steps. Lucia held his gaze. Her dark eyes shone with something no one in the room had ever seen in her before, a fierce, silent, unbreakable dignity. The tango grew. The orchestra, caught up in the intensity, increased the force of their notes. The violin screeched, the piano struck with vigor, and the bandoneon bled in every chord. Lucia took a step forward, forcing Javier to step back. It was imperceptible to many, but those who knew the language of tango noticed. She was no longer following, she was leading. An isolated round of applause erupted from the back. No one dared to join in, but the echo of those claps broke the charged air. Javier's expression hardened. He clenched his jaw like a cornered animal. "Who are you, really?" he whispered in her ear, his tone no longer mocking but desperate. Lucia didn't answer. She let herself be carried by the music, by the memory of her mother on those afternoons when tango was a refuge. Every step was an offering to that lost voice that still lived in her chest. The guests no longer looked at her with contempt. There was awe, respect, and in some eyes, even a glimmer of envy. The ridicule everyone had expected had transformed into an unexpected miracle. And as the music kept burning in the air, a certainty began to float over the hall: that woman wasn't there to be humiliated. She was there to unleash a truth no one had imagined. The tango burned in the air like an unquenchable fire. The orchestra, ignited by the energy of the moment, played with a force that made the crystal chandeliers vibrate. No one dared to speak. The luxury of the hall had become a silent theater where all were witnesses to a mystery unfolding before their eyes. Lucia spun with hypnotic precision. Every step was a blow of memory. The bandoneon's lament reminded her of the afternoons when her mother, in a humble courtyard, made her spin among hanging sheets. "Dance with your heart, daughter, not with your feet." The voice of that woman returned now, clear, giving back the strength she thought she had lost. Javier tried to impose himself. He pushed, pulled, marked violent steps, but each attempt at control left him more exposed. His face, which had been a mask of arrogance, now contorted with the tension of someone beginning to lose. Sweat beaded on his forehead, his tight lips betrayed the fear of being made a fool. "This can't be real," murmured a woman in a gold dress, her eyes fixed on the couple. "Look at her closely," replied an older man with a hoarse voice. "That woman didn't learn in secret. That woman was born for this." Lucia's steps grew bolder. A sudden spin left her with her back to Javier, and looking at him over her shoulder, her gaze held a confidence that chilled the millionaire's blood. She wasn't the submissive employee he had wanted to exhibit, she was someone else. The crowd held its breath. In every pause of the music, in every silence between measures, everyone's heart stopped. Even the waiters hidden in the shadows of the hall had abandoned their trays to watch. Lucia closed her eyes for a moment and let herself be swept away by the melody. In her mind appeared the image of her mother, her laughter, her hands guiding hers when she was just a child. The pain of loss transformed now into strength. Every movement was a dialogue with that beloved ghost who still lived within her. Javier felt it. He felt that the woman he had intended to ridicule was dancing with an invisible ally, with a force impossible to break. His fingers gripped Lucia's waist desperately. "Who are you?" he whispered with contained rage. Lucia opened her eyes and, in the middle of that hall loaded with luxury and cruelty, looked at him calmly. She said nothing, but her silence was more humiliating than any words. The music reached a crescendo. The violins tore, the piano struck like thunder, and the bandoneon wept as if breaking inside. The audience rose from their seats without knowing why, swept up by an emotion they could no longer contain. What had begun as a mockery had transformed into a ritual, and everyone understood they were witnessing something unrepeatable. The tango reached impossible heights. The music was a roar that made the stained glass windows tremble, a lament and a scream at the same time. The air was so charged with tension it seemed that if someone breathed too hard, the crystal of the chandeliers would shatter. Lucia spun with relentless grace. There was no stumbling, no mistake. Every movement was perfect, as if the music had been written for her. Her simple dress moved with unexpected dignity, as if the humble fabric had transformed into silk under the hall's lights. Javier, in contrast, grew clumsier. The arrogance of his first steps had vanished. Now desperation guided him. He tried to impose abrupt spins, violent changes of rhythm, but each time he did, it was he who lost his balance. Lucia, however, flowed naturally, forcing him to follow her without anyone noticing. "This is impossible," he muttered through gritted teeth, his lips close to her ear. Lucia heard him but didn't respond. Her eyes remained fixed on an invisible point, on that sacred memory where her mother still danced beside her. She needed no words. Her silence was a weapon sharper than any phrase. In the upper balconies, the guests began to murmur in a different tone. No longer laughter, no longer mockery, but whispers laden with awe. "I know her," said an older woman, squinting. "That look, those spins, it can't be," replied a man beside her. "She disappeared years ago." Down by the tables, a businessman raised his glass without looking away. That woman is no simple employee. She has the blood of art in her veins. The tension rose even higher when Javier, desperate to regain attention, attempted a risky move. He pulled Lucia brusquely to spin her with her back to him and pull her against his chest, but the force was so clumsy he almost knocked her down. A stifled gasp ran through the hall. Lucia, however, did not fall. She held on with a firmness that left everyone breathless. Her feet found the exact beat and, instead of the fall everyone feared, she executed an impeccable spin that left her facing Javier, her face inches from his. The audience burst into spontaneous applause. It wasn't customary to applaud mid-dance, but no one could contain themselves. The entire hall vibrated with an unknown energy, admiration, disbelief, pure emotion. Javier, flushed, gritted his teeth. He felt the night meant to reaffirm his power, turning into his greatest humiliation. And worst of all, every gaze was no longer on him, but on her. The music kept swelling, as if sensing something was about to be revealed. And in that instant, many began to understand that Lucia Morales was not the woman they all thought she was. The bandoneon's final chord stretched in the air like an invisible thread no one wanted to let go. The violins faded slowly. The piano released a deep note, and suddenly the silence was absolute. Lucia remained still, breathless, her face flushed with effort. Javier still held her, but his hands trembled. The mask of confidence had crumbled. Now it was he who seemed small before her. The audience didn't applaud immediately. They were too stunned. The echo of the tango still vibrated in the bones of every guest. No one knew if they should break that sacred moment with a noise as vulgar as clapping, until a solitary round of applause thundered from the back of the hall. An older man with white hair and a dark suit had given the first clap. Another followed, and another, until in seconds the entire palace rose to applaud. The applause resounded like thunder. Some shouted bravo. Others cried without understanding why, and many looked at each other in disbelief. The employee, who minutes before had been an object of mockery, had won every heart in that room. Lucia lowered her gaze humbly as she accepted that recognition she had never sought. But Javier was petrified. His cheeks burned with shame. The applause wasn't for him, it never had been, and that truth tore at him. Amid the roar of clapping, a voice rose, clear and strong, breaking the air. That woman is no stranger. The entire hall fell silent instantly. Hands stopped, breaths froze. Everyone turned toward the man who had spoken, an elderly gentleman in an elegant suit seated in the front row with a white handkerchief in his pocket. He stood up slowly. His gaze fixed on Lucia, and his lips trembled before he uttered the next words. She is the daughter of Isabel Morales, the great dancer. A murmur shot through the room like lightning. Isabel Morales? From the Teatro Colón? Impossible. She died over a decade ago. Lucia's eyes moistened upon hearing that name. Her chest tightened as if an invisible knot were choking her. She had never wanted to hear that truth in public. She had never wanted to carry that surname before strangers. But there was no hiding it now. The elderly man stepped forward, moved. I recognized it in her spins, in the strength of her arms, he said with a tremulous voice. You dance just like your mother. With the same pure heart. The hall erupted in an even greater murmur, mixed with tears and astonishment. Lucia, her voice breaking, barely managed to whisper, yes. I am her daughter. The secret had been revealed. The murmur of the crowd was deafening. Some couldn't believe what they had heard. Others tried to recall old performances where they had seen the legendary Isabel Morales shine on European stages. Javier swallowed hard. The surname rang too familiar, but he never would have imagined the woman serving glasses in his own palace had that blood in her veins. Lucia remained standing, breathless, unsure whether to flee or stand her ground. Her hands trembled, not from shame, but because the past had opened like a wound that never fully healed. The elderly man who had recognized her slowly advanced until he stood before her. Your mother was a legend, he said, his voice cracking with emotion. I saw her dance in this very country so many years ago. No one had her fire, and now I see it in you. Lucia lowered her gaze, holding back tears. My mother died when I was just a girl, she whispered. The illness consumed her in silence, far from the stages, far from everything. The guests listened in absolute silence. Even the most arrogant, those who had laughed before, were now moved. Lucia continued, her voice faltering. After her death, I looked for my father, but he shut the door on me. He never wanted to acknowledge me as his daughter. To him, I was just a mistake. A murmur of indignation swept the room. A lady with a pearl necklace brought her hand to her chest. How cruel, she exclaimed. Lucia took a deep breath. Her eyes shone with unshed tears. I grew up alone with my mother's memory as my only guide. And though I had dance in my blood, I abandoned it. I couldn't bear to hear the music without feeling her absence. I ended up looking for work where I could, and I found this place. Being an employee was my way to survive and to hide who I was. The room was mute. No one dared break that moment. Javier, feeling the audience's attention slipping from him completely, interjected with a voice laden with irony. So, you decided to hide behind a uniform? What's the point of having a gift if you bury it in shame? Lucia looked at him calmly. Her eyes showed no anger, but something deeper. It wasn't shame. It was pain. Dancing was losing her all over again every night. That's why I stayed silent. That's why I hid. The elderly man placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. And yet, tonight you brought her back. Your mother is here in every step you take. Tears finally slid down Lucia's face. They weren't tears of sadness, but of liberation. The entire audience held its breath. The employee had become the heir to a legend before their eyes, and the millionaire who had tried to humiliate her was being reduced to an uncomfortable echo amid that revelation. Javier stepped forward, brushing invisible dust from his jacket. His lips trembled between rage and disbelief. He couldn't allow this night designed to exhibit his power to end up crowning the woman he had treated as mere entertainment. Enough theater, he exclaimed, raising his voice over the emotional murmur. Don't be fooled by a forgotten surname. So this woman knows how to move her feet, she's still an employee who serves glasses in my house. Silence fell heavily. The guests looked at each other, uncomfortable. Javier's tone, far from commanding respect, sounded desperate. A lady with silver hair looked at him sternly. Don't speak like that, she said firmly. What we saw wasn't a whim. It was art. The elderly man who had recognized Lucia raised his hand, indignant. An employee? No, Mr. Montero. This woman carries the legacy of Isabel Morales in her blood, and tonight she has proven it before all of us. The murmurs intensified. There was indignation. Whispers of disapproval toward the millionaire who minutes earlier had been the center of attention. Javier clenched his fists, advancing toward Lucia. And you, he said bitterly, do you enjoy this? Do you enjoy seeing me ridiculed? Lucia looked at him without lowering her head. The trembling girl holding a tray had vanished. In her place stood a woman upright, with dried tears shining on her face and an unbreakable dignity. I didn't seek to humiliate you, Javier. I only accepted your challenge. You yourself called me to the center of the hall. The guests nodded silently. It was true, they had all heard it. She didn't seek the spotlight, added a voice from the crowd. You exposed her. The color drained from Javier's face. Never in his life had anyone confronted him like this, especially not in front of the entire elite gathered in his palace. This is absurd, he thundered, though his voice no longer had the same force. Lucia took a deep breath. I am not absurd. I am the daughter of a mother who taught me to dance with my heart. And though I hid it for years, tonight I have found it again. A spontaneous round of applause swept the room again. This time it wasn't timid or isolated. It was a collective roar. The guests stood, applauding fervently. Javier stood surrounded by that ovation that didn't belong to him. He tried to smile, but his expression broke. The power that had always protected him was dissolving before his very eyes, and in that instant he understood something that cut through him like a knife. The humiliation was no longer Lucia's. It was his. The ovation still echoed off the gilded walls of the hall when Javier, flushed, raised his hands asking for silence. He was struggling to breathe. He felt the pressure of 100 gazes piercing him like knives. The mask of the untouchable millionaire had fallen, and he knew it. "Listen to me," he said with a trembling voice trying to sound firm. All of this was a misunderstanding. A murmur of distrust rose among the guests. No one seemed to believe him. Javier took a step toward Lucia. "I didn't mean to offend you," he added, forcing a smile. "What happened here was unexpected. I admit I was wrong in my approach, but," he made a dramatic pause, "perhaps fate wanted us to meet this way." The word fate hung heavily in the air. Some looked at each other in disbelief, others with indignation. "Fate," repeated a woman in a red dress, almost spitting the word. "You humiliated her in front of everyone." Javier ignored the comment. He moved closer to Lucia, extending his hand with a solemn gesture. "Lucia Morales," he said with emphasis on the surname, as if wanting to claim it. "Today you have shown us who you are. A strong woman. A true artist. I ask for your forgiveness." The silence was dense. Everyone waited for Lucia's response. She observed him silently. Her breathing was serene, but inside, a whirlwind of memories and emotions raged. She remembered her mother telling her that dignity is not negotiable, that the purity of the heart is worth more than any wealth. "Forgiveness," she finally said, her voice firm. "Do you know what that word means, Javier? It's not a trick to soothe your wounded pride. Forgiveness is an act of truth. And you haven't understood it yet." The audience reacted with an intense murmur. No one had ever dared speak to Javier Montero like that. He retreated half a step, bewildered. I can change. I promise you." Lucia shook her head gently. "I don't seek for you to change for me. If you ever do, it will be for yourself." The elderly man who had recognized Lucia stepped forward, raising his voice. "This woman doesn't need your surname or your money. She already has the greatest thing, the dignity you tried to take from her." Immediate applause followed. The entire room stood up again. This time not only to admire the dance, but to defend Lucia. Javier was cornered. His last maneuver had crumbled in his hands. Lucia took a deep breath and, with a serenity that moved everyone, said, "I hold no grudge, Javier. But I will not play your game again. Tonight didn't change my destiny. It changed yours." The audience erupted in cheers, and Javier, defeated, lowered his head for the first time in his life. The palace ballroom seemed like a different place. The cruel laughter from barely an hour before had transformed into a chorus of cheers and applause. The echo of that ovation seemed endless. No one spoke of Javier, no one commented on his wealth or his eccentricities. Everything revolved around Lucia. She remained in the center, her uniform still on, tears streaming down her face, her eyes lit with a light no one had seen all night. The invisible woman had ceased to be invisible forever. The elderly man who had recognized her raised a glass. "Today we have witnessed a miracle," he said solemnly. "Not only the return of Isabel Morales's spirit, but the redemption of her legacy in the strength of her daughter." The audience toasted with him, raising glasses while some chanted her name. "Lucia! Lucia!" Javier, in a corner, watched with a pale face. No one looked at him with admiration anymore. The same people who used to laugh at his jokes now avoided his gaze. The humiliation was total, but different from what he had tried to inflict. This one carried the weight of truth. Lucia took a deep breath, stepped forward, and raised her voice, clear, firm, resonating in every corner. I didn't seek this night. I didn't ask to be in the center. But I learned that hiding who we are is also a form of abandonment. For years I stayed silent out of pain, out of fear. Today I understood that my mother didn't completely die, because she lives on in every measure I dance. An emotional murmur swept the hall. Some cried openly. Forgiveness exists, she continued, but it's not about excusing cruelty. It's about not letting it steal what we love. Tonight I didn't dance for Javier or for you. I danced to honor my mother and to remember that even in the midst of humiliation, hope can rise. The audience applauded on their feet once more. This time the musicians joined in, tapping their instruments with respect, as if closing a ritual. Javier tried to open his mouth, but no sound came out. Lucia looked at him one last time with serenity. I hope one day you discover that true greatness isn't measured in money or mockery, but in the ability to connect with a pure heart. He lowered his head. There was no possible reply. The orchestra, on its own initiative, resumed a soft melody. Not of mockery or spectacle, but of homage. Lucia, with calm steps, retreated toward the hall's exit, and as she advanced, everyone's clapping marked the rhythm of a triumphant farewell. That night, Madrid would remember a single name, and it would no longer be Javier Montero's. That night was etched in the memory of all present. What began as a power play ended up revealing the silent strength of a woman who had carried pain and abandonment but never lost the purity of her heart. Lucia Morales needed no wealth or recognized surnames to shine. The connection with her mother's memory, the hope she had guarded since childhood, and the courage to face contempt without lowering her gaze were enough. Her dance wasn't just a spectacle, it was an act of redemption, a bridge between a wounded past and a luminous present. Javier Montero, in contrast, learned the hard way that arrogance never withstands dignity. The luxury, the bought applause, and the false friendships dissolved in seconds when the truth stood bare. And though he asked for forgiveness, he understood that true forgiveness isn't demanded. It's earned with humility and change. The entire hall witnessed a simple but immense miracle, how a woman who seemed invisible transformed into a symbol of respect and hope. Because in the end, what remains aren't the taunts or the wealth, but the capacity to forgive, to keep faith in family, to honor those we love, and to dance, even amid pain, with an open soul. Thank you for accompanying us to the end of this story. Tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss our next stories. Leave a like if you believe in the invisible strength of dignity and family. And before you go, check out the story I've left for you here on the left. I'm sure it will also move you and make you reflect.